Hey everyone, welcome to this episode with Grow with the Flow. Today we have a very special guest with us. We have Khaled Hussein, who's co-founder and CEO of Betterleap. Khaled, Betterleap is one of the oldest partners of Recruiter Flow and a great AI-based sourcing and outreach tool built specifically for recruiting and staffing industry. Khaled, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, let's dive right in, Khalid. Why don't you, tell us about your journey with Betterleap, the pivots that you had, the funding, and how you got to the version that you have today?
Oh man, I can take the rest of the hour on this one.
I know
I
these stories are always wild, and
yeah,
so dear to our hearts.
yeah.
I know where you're coming from.
Yeah, no. So to give a little bit of kind of background and context on how I got to Better Leap. So I am a very fortunate serial entrepreneur. I built my first company. It was a company called Tilt. It was kind of a group payments platform. And that was, YC company and all of that. And then we sold that company to Airbnb in early 2017. It was really an interesting journey. We got to learn a lot, and Airbnb is one of the best companies to work at. And I worked there for about a year and a half, and then I kind of left to kind of explore. Once an entrepreneur, always entrepreneur. So I wanted to explore what I want to do next, and I got into real estate, and ran into mortgages and so forth. So I ended up building another company called Red Door. Sold that to Open Door. It was a tech-enabled mortgage broker. And really the one, there's so many lessons throughout building those two companies, but one thread is some of the best companies are built to solve your own problem. And so, I ran into the group payments problem at Tilt, and I ran into the mortgages problem with Red Door, and, tried to solve it with that company. And then I left after the acquisition of Red Door, ended up building a fund called Stipple. And from that, we incubate companies. And, I ended up kind of being as an angel investor also in a lot of different companies. I think at the time it was maybe 40 or 50 startups. And a lot of those startups were hiring and running into all kinds of issues with recruiting. And some of them are doing really, really well as kind of hyper growth, which means recruiting is the number one thing they need to solve, and others were not doing so well, and which also means you kind of need to maybe revisit that team. And so recruiting is, touching both my entire portfolio on both sides. And really my answer to a lot of these kind of either boards or founders that I invested in was I just connect them with good recruiters, and the only way I know good recruiters is through referrals and or people that I worked with before. And then I follow back with these founders, a couple months later, and then they're like, yeah, sometimes they really love the recruiters that I sent them to, and other times they really don't, even though it's the same recruiter. I'm like, what happened here? Why one time it worked really well and another time didn't work really well? And that kind of was the beginning of this kind of flame of, I want to look into recruiting as an industry and see if there is something I could do to help, the portfolio that I invested in and the recruiters that I keep referring. And so, again, kind of the same theme of solving my own problem. And so I started building a product that has nothing to do with what we are today, but it's in the recruiting space. And it's one of those industries that kind of, humbles you quite a bit in the beginning.
No doubt.
We started with a product, and we ended up building it for a couple months and then put it in front of customers. And really, a lot of them were like, well, what is that? What do we do with this? And that was kind of really a good wake-up call that, you can't build it in isolation in a cave. And, we thought we understand kind of the problem, but really, we started to bring in the customers very close to the build, and that resulted into a number of pivots. And then we landed on what we have today, which is the way we describe it as an AI-powered sourcing and outreach platform. We built one of the largest sort of database out there, and we also integrate with a number of ATSs. Recruiter Flow is definitely one of them, and we were really excited early on. It's one of the the first integrations that we built, and that unlocked a lot of opportunities for us and also allowed us to build even more for the customers through this type of partnerships. And
Mm.
yeah, and then that journey just kind of progressed from there.
Yeah, no, perfect. I mean, it's very parallel to our journey. For me also, my second startup, raised money, sold my first startup, joined another company, realized how incredibly tough recruiting is. Started a product in recruiting space, but not the same name, Recruiter Flow, but not the product that we have today.
Oh,
Had a
interesting. I
few
didn't
hard knocks for a year and a half. Realized that, hey, there is a different kind of a need in the market than what we originally thought, but we are not too far off of the target, so kind of pivoted. um and yeah, the rest is history. Here we are, right? So it's when the rubber meets the road, in this industry, it's a very, very humbling experience. It's a tough industry. um Speaking of tough industry, right, like you are in a space that's crowded, right? Like it's a competitive space, let me put it that way. So are we. Um, what what differentiates Betterleap from a host of competitors that are out there?
Yeah, I think there is a number of factors that really answer the why now. I think, the differentiation is one way to ask the question, what differentiates you? But the other one is, well, why now when there is a crowded market and, there is a lot of players in the space and all of that? And we got really lucky. Those are one of those things where, we end up getting credit for, but the truth is it was all luck. And a lot of it was the timing of the kind of explosion of the technology of AI and the availability of that data at a cost efficient way that we can actually do things that we couldn't have done like 10 years before. And so you find a lot of competitors started 7, 8, 10 years prior to us, and they had to go through a lot of this kind of hard phase of building all that. And then a lot of it is kind of archaic technology that you kind of, in order for you to turn into the AI world, you basically have to rebuild, which is not practical. So we kind of got very lucky with the timing. But what that actually means in terms of differentiation is we look at AI, there is a few different applications of AI in recruiting. And generally, people think of AI as, use GPT to generate a job description. And AI just has a lot more applications than that. And the way I simplify it is there's three different categories of AI in recruiting. And I'll talk about all three in a second. But what differentiates Betterleap is we built the recruiting platform that relies on all three pillars and provides that to recruiters. You'll find a lot of our competitors, they provide one or two of those kind of three pillars, but there isn't really a platform out there that provides all three pillars. And so the first pillar is what you find as recommendation kind of engines and scoring engines. And so you find a lot of those as, platforms that say, give me similar candidates, or they just give you some recommendation, some sort of recommendation of candidates that you're sourcing from. And that is, could be differentiated by how good the recommendations are. The second one is GPT related kind of generative AI capabilities. So if you're writing job description or outreach email campaign or an offer letter or whatnot, you can kind of use GPT to generate some of that content and help you significantly increase your productivity with the day-to-day administrative tasks. Then the third category, which is we're super excited to have launched a few weeks ago, it was in beta for quite a bit, almost a year, what we call the natural language sourcing, and that is using AI in the actual search algorithm itself. And so historically, people use Booleans or using a number of these filters, on that whatever sourcing platforms gives you, filters like, location and title and things of that nature. But what we were able to accomplish using AI is we were able to combine the filters and the Booleans with what we call natural language search. And that allows you to write a query in kind of your own natural language. You can say, give me engineers within 30-minute drive of Google HQ. And Google HQ is not an address. It just, you and I would understand what that means. but the computer has to know what that actually really means and has to do all the right kind of math of the 30-minute drive and so forth. And so, and that's really groundbreaking kind of application of AI and the search and the sourcing capabilities that allows recruiters to find candidates they couldn't have found without that capability. So when you combine the power of natural language search with the filters and Booleans, with the GPT and generative AI capabilities and the recommendation kind of models that help you understand and get similar candidates to what you're looking for and the ideal candidates, when you combine all three together into a sourcing platform, that becomes a very magical experience that we just haven't seen on the market. And
Yeah.
we were very fortunate to kind of start building the platform at kind of the beginning of that wave and picked up from there.
Makes sense. And so at Recruiter Flow, I think we have a very similar way of looking at AI, right? Like, so we put all of AI efforts into two kind of buckets, right? So the first bucket is UX, right? So generative AI is part of UX, right? Like, hey, I don't have to type this whole note. I don't have to type this whole job description. Just let ChatGPT or any LLM do it, right? So that's number one. Another thing that we have, and we've seen a lot of usage of it, is we have a speech to text built into Recruiter Flow now. So if you, instead of typing out really long screening notes, you can just say that to Recruiter Flow, and it will create that note, summarizations and things like that, right? So it's just, you were anyway going to do those things. It would just, instead of taking 5 minutes to do something, now you are going to maybe take a minute and a half to do the same thing. Maybe marginally better or marginally worse, but essentially the very similar kind of an output. So that's so we put that in the UX bucket. And the second bucket is what you talk about, what you also kind of touched upon, is helping people do more with their own data, right? So there is humongous amount of data is available to people. It's just the discovery of that data, the freshness of that data, and is not up to the mark, right? And a lot of the times, you find somebody on your sourcing platforms, right? Like, let's say LinkedIn Recruiter, only to realize that, hey, somebody in your team had a conversation with that person maybe a couple of years back. You should have known that before you went through the whole search process on LinkedIn, right? So this is enabling a use case that didn't really exist earlier. Now, do you have a quick 2-minute demo of Betterleap's capabilities, and how the I'm really interested in the natural language searching. So if you have
Yeah.
a 2-minute demo, let's do it.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Let me share my screen really quick. All right. So this is Betterleap. When you log into the platform, so again, we're a sourcing and outreach platform. Besides your dashboard, you're going to see the sourcing tab, and you're going to see the projects where you can run the outreach. The sourcing tab is similar to a number of other kind of sourcing platforms. You're going to find a lot of these kind of filters on the left-hand side with the titles and skills and so forth. And we're Boolean search compatible with other platforms as well. And you can kind of use the filters in kind of the normal way that a recruiter sources. But what makes Betterleap really differentiated is the second kind of level of sourcing capabilities, which is using the natural language. And this is, the query that I mentioned maybe earlier. You can type here in the search bar anything you want. That gives you capabilities to say, give me engineers located within 30-minute drive of Google HQ. And you notice that there is actually no place there is no platform that you can put in a 30-minute drive of Google HQ. That there is no filter that
Yeah.
I could use to do that. It's only possible using natural language capabilities in a platform. And so what that allows you to do is then explore areas that you may not have been considering when you were doing your search from the beginning. So if you were to say, give me engineers within 30-minute drive, you may remember out of, out of your head is it's kind of 3 different cities or 4 different cities, but you may have forgotten two. And maybe those 2 cities actually where that engineer you were looking for was at. And what that means is, as a recruiter, you're able to discover candidates you weren't able to find using just the filters because of the comprehensiveness and the discoverability of the search bar. The analogy I give people is, imagine Google was built with just a number of filters and there's no search
Yeah.
bar. That's how we find
Yeah.
things. We would laugh at it. And so, but that is what we kind of do in pretty much most kind of sourcing platforms. And the search bar is what really provides a lot of very powerful capabilities to the recruiters. And it can go beyond, these are just kind of easy, quick queries I could write here, but it could go way beyond that, and it would understand our own lingo. And it could even be educational when you say, for example, give me designers who work at companies similar to OpenAI. And so it helps you even understand, well, what other companies can I source from? And as the recruiter, that's very profound because you might think of 4 or 5 competitors to search from, but there is maybe 20 more that you did not know about, and you could have found your engineer or kind of the candidates you're looking for there. We're also industry agnostic, so you kind of find this being applied to um, other sectors as well. It would even understand things like inversions. So, people located in California, but not in San Francisco Bay Area, and it would just create the inversion for you. And so you'll
Yeah.
find, like, as you look at it and you try to use it, it always draws a smile to people when they're using this, because they're like, oh, wow, yeah, that's clever. And, you could kind of see how far it could go, and even expands on titles for us. And it learns from your behavior. And if you see, okay, for example, this candidate is not a good candidate, and you give it feedback next time you run the same query, it starts to learn about why was that, candidate was not the right fit for the search. And one of the things that I'm really excited about to highlight in this demo is kind of the integration that we have with Recruiter Flow. And what that allows Recruiter Flow's customers to do is that they can connect their ATS and they can use the entire sourcing capabilities and technology, but on top of their own ATS and their own data. All they have to do is switch from the world
Wow.
talent, which is the Betterleap, and switch to my talent pool. And now all of a sudden they kind of have this very advanced sourcing platform that's running on top of their candidate data in Recruiter Flow. And that just helps. You can imagine staffing firms that have been in the business for many, many years. They have candidates with outdated info and years of great potential candidates that they don't even remember or keep track of. And using a platform like this allows them to rediscover those candidates and source them on demand using that search bar. um, that makes this really, really interesting.
That is fantastic. Now, talking about AI, right? Like, uh, the opinion in our world is quite divided. So on one hand, there is a lot of fear that, hey, the technology is here to kind of replace recruiters, and on the other extreme, it's just there are a lot of believers that, hey, it's just a bunch of hogwash and marketing speak, and it won't even ever come close to doing anything meaningful or productive, except writing job descriptions and writing emails and doing those small things, which is generic. It's nothing specific to recruiting, right? Um so let's dive a little bit deeper into that, right? What's your opinion of on the state of AI today, and its application, um, and implications for our industry?
Yeah. I'd love to know your thoughts as well. One of the questions that's just always, the mainstream questions is, will AI replace recruiters? And what right. And so, on one hand, you find people that say, absolutely, yes, this is the end of recruiting as we ever know it. And then on the other side, you find people that is like, nah, just one big scam. And so the way I think about this is I kind of, I always see history repeating itself. And if you stay in this industry for long enough, you kind of see some patterns. And if you look at the beginning of recruiting, was in the early 40s, and you find recruiters back then, they used to have this recruiting book. They would literally have kind of a notebook, and they would have a meeting with an engineering manager at some company, and then they would ask him, like, so tell me who works on your team and who's good and who's not, and where did they work before, and they would go grab dinner with this other person and get more info, and they write it in that book. And then if you want to hire an engineer, you go find the recruiter with the biggest book. And so
Yeah.
they give you the potential kind of candidates you want to hire for. And then came LinkedIn and Indeed and these kind of professional networks to have all these profiles on the networks. And back then people were like, well, this is it. This is it. Recruiters are gone. We're never going to need recruiters again, because
I
you can
remember that.
go, then now you can just go search and find these, you don't need the recruiter, you don't need their book, it doesn't really matter. Now we have the biggest book of all, and we can just log into LinkedIn and search for people, and we're done. We don't need recruiters. And, if somebody were to say that today, we'd all laugh, right? The recruiting industry is bigger than it's ever been.
Yeah.
And we have more recruiters now than 10 years ago. And we have, more dollars kind of floating in that industry than before, and it's incredible. Like, if anything, that technology just made the industry even bigger. And if you follow that pattern, I do think we're entering another wave that is very similar to this. And you find a lot of different applications of AI in the recruiting industry. And on one side, you find people are saying again, it's like, this frenzy of, oh my God, this is it. We're done. We don't need recruiters again anymore. The technology computer can just source for us. We don't need anybody sourcing. The technology can reach out to the candidates. We don't need anybody to reach out to the candidates. And the technology can do all these things, and we don't need the recruiter anymore. And I think if you fast forward, 4 or 5 years from now, we're going to look back and laugh again. And I personally believe that it's going to be one of the things that it will change the industry for the better, for the bigger. I do think it will have an even bigger impact on the industry, and it will make the industry itself bigger. The recruiters will be more productive, potentially even more lucrative to the recruiters as they scale, because they're going to be able to do a lot more with less using that technology. And I do think we're going to see an even explosion in the industry in terms of the independent recruiters and kind of the long tail of the staffing industry. And so in many ways, I'm a strong believer that kind of in these patterns and
Yeah.
history itself. And I think AI is actually going to improve the recruiting industry and the lives of the recruiters, as opposed to replacing.
Nope. I couldn't have agreed more. Funny enough, just a couple of weeks back, somebody in my team, in one of our one-on-one calls, asked me, "Hey, why do recruiters exist in the first place?" And they gave a very clever example, right? Like they said, "Hey, that person's father had told her that when he was young and he used to trade on the stock market, he would call his broker on Bombay Stock Exchange, would tell him an order, then that broker would then call somebody at the floor, and somebody at that floor will shout that order, and now we have these online brokerages, right? So those people were brokers of information, and they are long gone. With now we have Indeed, LinkedIn. These are great brokers of information. Information is out available. Information is a commodity out available for everyone. Why do these guys still exist? And I thought, yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I said that it's exactly that, right? Like, recruiters are not brokers of information. If they were plain and simple brokers of information, they would have gone extinct a long time back. Why recruiting still exists is that it's a very high stakes game, both for employer as well as the employee, right? So for a candidate, they want to have real people, real relationships, and there is a kind of a feedback loop that gets built, right? So you mentioned who has the biggest book, right? Like, going back to 50s and 60s, you would go to the recruiter in your area who had the biggest book, and you like that person, right? So those are the only two qualifying criterias. Um, so um, what it meant was that, if you had the biggest book, you would get more and more clients to come and talk to you and say that, hey, I need 10 engineers, 5 product managers, and yada, yada, yada. And they would come to you because they know that you have the biggest book, you have the best relationships, you have the access that they don't, access to talent that they don't. So they pay you for that access. And on the other hand, the talent comes to you because they know that you are, talking to maybe 20 clients at the same time, and you can present them, you know, 20 different opportunities instead of maybe just a couple, right? So, and that's why the talent comes and talks to agency recruiters. So it becomes kind of a virtuous feedback loop. Of course, it has its limitations, and that's the reason that this industry works. And with AI, as recruiters get more productive, more efficient in building those relationships more proactively, finding that data more proactively, this feedback loop is only going to get stronger. So recruiters, and as this feedback loop has gotten stronger, right? Like with once the information asymmetry was gone, the feedback loop got stronger. Once this productivity kicks in, this feedback loop will get even stronger. And yeah, I mean, I agree, right? Like 5 years down the road, we will probably laugh at this notion that AI would be able to replace recruiters. The job would change, most likely, right? Like the things that you spend time on today would definitely change over the course of next 5 years, 10 years. But yeah, the industry is going nowhere. It's only going to get bigger as it becomes increasingly more and more competitive, right? So it'll create great outcomes, right? Like great outcome for talent, great outcome for employers. So it's a win-win-win kind of a proposition. Um, so in terms of sorry, God, I lost my
No, no, it's
train.
actually I agree with you completely. And I think one of the human behavior things that we also see is the differentiation, especially as you try to find different industries. They kind of look at recruiting a little bit differently. There's a lot of different nuances there. But if you're trying to find really top talent is really interested in sort of a differentiated offering, if you will. And an offering starts with how you even reach out to that candidate
Yeah,
and appreciated experience all along. And if we were to imagine a world where everything is sort of robotic, then there's really no differentiation whatsoever. And
yeah,
then it goes back to whoever is using that recruiter that's creating that unique experience. That's going to be the
experience.
luxury
Yeah,
experience. That's going to be what the top talent is actually more interested in. So I think as human behavior in general, we're just always interested in that unique experience.
yeah,
And experience really matters a lot, and especially in recruiting. It's a big decision for candidates to join a company. It's their career, their job. It's what, their livelihood. It's how many years they're committing to that job. So creating that experience and spending on it is absolutely worth every penny.
yeah, absolutely. And there is a very old adage in marketing, right? Like as a channel becomes more popular, the efficiency of that channel just decreases quite exponentially because everybody. So in the beginning, something's new, there is fascination, a lot of engagement. So we might see that with AI and AI-based messaging, but once people will very quickly be able to figure out that this is a robot-generated message, a robot-generated outreach, um, and it will have like a peak, and then after that it's going to go downhill very, very fast, and everything kind of merges towards equilibrium conversion rates, right? So we probably will see the same with this new channel. We you know the founders in us are always optimistic in the for the future, but um, looking back, 2023 was one of the toughest years for the industry, right? Like, I've been looking at all the large public staffing companies and their earnings and their reports. Everybody's hemorrhaging margins. Of people are, different companies are down between 25, 35%. valuations are down quite significantly. Even there have been a lot of layoffs in the world of recruiting. Um, it's the current environment makes it hard for people to be optimistic about the future. I want to understand your take on, let's just say for only for 2024, how do you envision this year for our industry?
Yeah. And I don't want to kind of burn your card. I do know you have some news coming up, but I'm kind of curious to know when you looked at, some of the public companies and what 23 was like for them, did you compare what the companies are today to 2020 to 2019? I'm kind of curious to kind of see what the trend
Oh
is.
yeah,
So yeah, so
they're doing much better, much better.
so that's my answer. So my answer to what do I think of the market today, I do think the market is actually better than ever. And even with kind of the toughness of the 23, and I'm actually very optimistic on kind of 24 and moving forward. And the reason I say so is just from the growth, the economic growth from and a trend from 2018, 19, 2020, and then coming extrapolating that to where we're at today. So you're going to find in pretty much all of these companies, there is that dip that happened in 2020, and then, that recovery in 21, and then boom, and just that peak. You know what I mean? Where like
Yeah.
everybody was making a lot of money. Um, and that peak just kind of kept going, and 22 is just went even higher, and then you find this kind of pullback that happened in 23, but on average you're going to find that pullback, I mean, which is significant percentages, 20-25%, and it really hurts. But at the same time, that pullback of 23 at 20% is really continuing the same trend from 2020, and kind of continuing to go from there. And so in many ways, I do think that, which is actually one of the things that I really personally love about this industry. The industry is by and large is overall in the long, and when you zoom in, you see a lot of oscillation, but when you zoom out, in the long run of this industry, even from early 2000s all the way till now, it's very stable industry, and it continues to grow year over year. Maybe there's a dip one year, but then it just comes back as kind of continues to grow. The overall kind of market cap of that industry, it just is consistently growing in a very reliable fashion. And even during the pandemic, and it just kind of kept growing even more. It's a very interesting and fascinating industry. And when you zoom out even more from that, and you ask the question, so why is, we might see kind of a blip in 1 year or two, but then it picks back up. So why is this industry kind of keeps growing? And it's a human fundamental question, which is people need jobs. Companies need to grow.
Yeah.
Companies need to grow. They're just the nature of people and business. And so therefore, as a staffing industry, whether that is temp, whether that is permanent, whether that is in-house, whether that is external, whether that is tools, whether that is, services and consulting, and the industry has so many different kind of aspects to it. But the aggregate of all these aspects is just continuously growing with the growing population of, humanity, and the growing business and the growing economy. So as you zoom out, I feel very optimistic. If I zoom all the way in, yeah, it looks a little darker.
That is a fantastic perspective. It reminds me of the Shopify earnings call, I think last year, where they said that okay, the pandemic and the pandemic related quantitative easing created this temporary um, you know, uh, kind of a boom in online shopping. But now we are coming back to our original growth path. But even that growth path was pretty fantastic. It's just that, uh, Shopify assumed that, this boom is there forever. Didn't turn out to be the case, and they had to kind of pull back, do a little bit of layoffs. But um, overall, right, like I think uh, the amount of transactions, the amount of revenue or Shopify, right? Like I think of that as a great example. Um, it's pretty much back into that original trajectory that you would see. And um, there is, for me, I look at it from this perspective that, hey, the there are two primary factors that helps this industry grow, right? Like more people seeking, more people, more companies, more jobs, and more people looking for jobs, right? So that's number one. And number two is productivity of each person working in this industry, right? Like that's recruiters, sourcers, whoever, right? Both of those things are still growing at a reasonably good pace. Macro, there is no reason for us to believe that the gloom and doom is going to continue. It's a question of when and not if for me. And when nobody controls when, so you might as well just keep your heads down and keep executing, right? So that's the perspective that we come from. Um, Changing gears a little bit, I want to talk about Betterleap a little bit more. Are there any cool new features that you have on the roadmap that you are really, really excited about?
Yeah, I am. So that we do believe it's going to set context for this is, there is Google and there is Yahoo, and a lot of us use Google. We don't use Yahoo for search, and there's pretty good reason. It's because when we use Google, we get the answer right away. When we use Yahoo, we're probably in page 7 before we even know what the answer is. And what's fascinating about that scenario right there is they both have access to the same data.
Yeah.
They both crawl the same web. And so it's not that Google is able to get an answer faster or in page 1 because they have more data. It's they just have a much better search algorithm, and they look at the data that they have access to in a different way than what Yahoo does. And then that obviously kind of built a whole bunch of other things on top. Um, with that context, I do believe that, the search algorithm in a lot of the sourcing platforms, so even beyond that search bar, that's missing in a lot of other sourcing platforms, the search algorithm is very outdated, that it would look at the data in a little bit different way than kind of the modern way of looking at the data in the world of LLMs and so forth. And so when you reconsider, and if you're fortunate enough to have the opportunity to kind of build from scratch and use the modern technology of LLMs and search, you can think of all the possibilities of making that search bar a very smart search bar. So we're really excited to make that search bar a truly magical and a smart search bar that allows you to not only source candidates and using the natural language, we already have that today, but it gets to learn more from your behavior, it gets to learn more from your outreach, it gets to learn more from the candidates that you're interested in and the candidates that you pass on, and how many views, so that we kind of look at the search results of candidates as kind of your page 1. And ideally, you want to get you the candidates that you want to reach out to all in page 1. And so
Okay.
there is a lot of kind of, uh, like true computer science work here to be
Yeah.
done. And that's really exciting. And because the implications on the recruiters is when you run a search, right away, every candidate you see is a really great candidate you want to reach out to. And that's a very magical experience that takes time and it takes work. And it's a very strongly differentiated offering as well.
Well, that's a beautiful way to put it. I can't wait to see um, can't wait to see that. Good luck with that, and thank you so much, Khaled, for joining me on this episode.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you so much.